I'm Kevin Zimmerman from Unlocking Black History on YouTube. And on this session, I'm going to address some statements that were made or commented regarding some of the videos that I posted, as well as these same statements have recently been stated by a well-known celebrity, Nick Cannon, in his conversation with another celebrity figure, Amber Rose. The statements were this: the Democratic Party is the party of the KKK, and the Republican Party is the party that freed the slaves. And they went on to say that Black people should be a part of the Republican Party because the Democratic Party does not care about Black people. Now, I want to be clear. It is not my intent to argue for or against a political party. That's not what I'm doing here. But how the KKK impacted Blacks throughout the plight of Blacks in America, and how a political party affected Blacks and their plight in Black history and in American history. I feel like that's something that warrants being addressed. So I'm going to do that here today, and I'm excited about it because it is very important that when we talk about things pertaining to Black history, that we are accurate in what we are expressing. So we're going to start here. In this live stream, we're going to discuss who was the Democratic Party in 1792, and actually they were called the Democratic Republican Party at that time. And then who was the Republican Party in 1854? We're going to talk about Abraham Lincoln and his decision to free the slaves, why he freed the slaves, but what was his mental state regarding Black people at that time. We're going to talk about that as well. We're going to talk about the KKK. We have to talk about the KKK because the KKK had significant negative impact on the plight of Blacks in America. But then we're going to, in all of this, explaining what was called the Great Switch. As a matter of fact, you cannot make the statement that the Democratic Party was the party of the KKK and the Republican Party was the party that freed the slaves and put a period behind that. Whenever you make that statement, it is disingenuous to not then explain what was called the Great Switch that took place in around the 19, well, it started around 1930 and it went on to 1970. So with that being said, let's get started, right? I'm going to start at 1619 with the arrival of the White Lion offloading 20 and some odd slaves at Port Comfort, Virginia. I'm starting there because that was the catalyst that propelled the Americas into becoming a superpower. I understand that America likes to use 1776 as the starting point. I get that. However, I'm going to start at 1619 because it was during 1619 that in turn compelled the Americas into becoming a superpower at the start of that, on the basis of using chattel slavery. And I want to be clear here. Some aren't aware of the difference between slavery and chattel slavery. So I'm going to take a brief moment to explain that. Yes, slavery had been instituted all around the world, and we saw that America was not the only place that instituted slavery. However, chattel slavery was not instituted anywhere else except the Americas. And the difference between slavery and chattel slavery is this: chattel slavery was to be able to legally dehumanize someone to the position of being property solely on the basis of their skin. Yes, once again, chattel slavery, which was not instituted until it was here in the Americas, was the legal means of dehumanizing someone, reducing them to property for a lifetime, by the way, solely on the basis of them being Black. And real quick, before we go anywhere, I'm going to type here in the comments, please feel free, please feel free, or let me know. Let's do that. Let me know your name and where you're from so that I can have an idea who's on here with us. Okay, so there we go. So I'm starting there because chattel slavery, uh, the South got extremely wealthy off of chattel slavery because it was free labor producing primarily cotton, tobacco, and sugar. And so we're going to start there and then propel ourselves to 1776 when the original 13 colonies got to the point where they wanted to declare their independence from Great Britain. Why? They weren't happy with the idea of what was called taxation without representation. So they declared their independence from Great Britain, and now we're established as a sovereign country. The Declaration of Independence is written, and in that Declaration of Independence, it does state that all men are created equal and they are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, that amongst these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I want you to remember that because I am going to address that next week as well. But as the country began to become established, in comes the Federalists. Now, the Federalists, led by Alexander Hamilton and James Madison, were supporters of the Constitution, and they desired a strong central government. That was the Federalists. The country is starting to take shape. It's forming. It's moving forward. And the Federalists didn't believe that the independent territories or the independent states at that time, or territories at that time, would be able to unilaterally do things consistent with the other territories and states that can move the country forward. And so they said, what we need is a strong central government. With the Federalists taking that position, of course, there came some opposition. And that opposition came by way of the Republican Party that was led by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. Now, the Republican Party was founded in 1792. And this Democratic Party, I'm sorry, let me correct myself. The Democratic Republican Party, founded by James Madison and Thomas Jefferson, was highly in favor of the institution of slavery. And once again, we can understand why. Here it is, you have the Federalists saying that they want to establish a central form of government to kind of keep everyone in the same alignment. Yet it was the South that was producing a large amount of money, so much so that it propelled the Americas into becoming a superpower. And so the South, in turn, desired to expand slavery. So that's where we are. Now, at this point, we now have a young nation that's growing. Chattel slavery is proving to be prosperous as free labor in the South. However, the North is transitioning towards industrialization and modernization. That being said, it's also important to note that you had Democrats in the North and you had Democrats in the South. The Southern Democrats, of course, were pro institution of slavery. The Northern Democrats, not all, but some in the North, were not so much anti slavery, but they were against the expansion of slavery. So, with this clash of should we keep slavery in the South and not allow it to expand into the Western territories, and hey, listen, the agricultural perspective that we're taking here in the South has made the country or made the Americas so much money and so much wealth. We should expand that opportunity into the Western territories. While the clash of those two were taking place, something else was also happening. And what that something else was the thrusting forward of people like Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, and Frederick Douglass, abolitionists. The abolitionist movement was weakening to a degree the through the benefits of what was happening through chattel slavery in the South by having slaves or promoting that slavery should not be allowed and supporting the escape from slavery. So that was taking place as well. And along with the abolitionists, then you have what was called the radical Republicans that came about. You had people like Thaddeus Stevens and Charles Sumner, which were called the radical Republicans. And they were called radical Republicans because they believed in the immediate and the universal emancipation of enslaved people. Charles Sumner and Thaddeus Stevens said, hey, when it comes to this whole slavery thing, let's just get rid of it all. And of course, that created a significant problem. Along with them talking about the universal elimination of slavery comes Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln runs his campaign in opposition of the expansion of slavery into the Western territories. That's when the fight started. Before he even took office, we had what was called the succession. And it's accurate to align the 11 southern states that succeeded from the Union with the formation of the Confederacy. Southern Democrats aligned with the formation of the Confederacy. And the Confederacy's primary role was to preserve, protect, and expand chattel slavery. Civil War happens, and when the Civil War happened, Abraham Lincoln then freed the slaves. But it's important to go down a deeper rabbit hole here. Abraham Lincoln did not free all of the slaves. Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves that were in the Confederate States. And he did it as a military measure that he understood would weaken the Confederacy. So Abraham Lincoln did not free all of the slaves. He only freed the slaves in the Confederate States. The slaves that were in what was called the border states or loyal states remained slaves. He had no impact on that whatsoever. But he only freed the slaves in the Confederate States as a military war measure to weaken the Confederacy that gave the North a military advantage. Now, while we're applauding Abraham Lincoln, in an 1858 debate he was having, he clearly said that he was not in favor of bringing about social or political equality between the Black race and the white race. Then he explicitly mentioned in that debate that he favored the white race occupying the superior position over the Black race. So I want to make sure that as we study history, as we study Black history and the impact that various people had on the plight of Blacks in America, that we make this plain and we make this clear. We see no reason to applaud Abraham Lincoln for freeing the slaves out of some deeply compelled moral conviction. He himself said that he sees, or his perspective was the position that the white race was superior to the Black race. Okay, now that that's clear, let's move forward. We have the succession. The Southern Democrats formed the Confederacy, whose role is to preserve, protect, and defend the institution of slavery. And also in there, it is to establish the superiority of the white race. Okay. We go through that period. The North wins the fight. We have a Reconstruction. And what was Reconstruction? Reconstruction was the transformation of formerly enslaved people into citizenship. That created a problem because when that happened, we now have the formation and the insertion of the Ku Klux Klan, which was formed in 1865. What was the role of the Ku Klux Klan? The Ku Klux Klan's role was to restore white supremacy and oppose civil rights for newly freed Black people. That was the role of the Ku Klux Klan. Now, I picked this picture here in particular, even though this picture was taken in 2019. This wasn't from the formation of the KKK in 1865, but it's something in this picture that is very similar to what we often hear in today's climate. And you see the picture says America First. And I found that to be interesting because although there is no tie or legal tie that I can say with white radical extremism, we do recognize that often when you see white radical extremism, white radical extremism seems to align with a party that is in opposition to civil rights. That is a point that cannot be argued. Now, let's move forward. We're going to go from the time of the insertion of the Ku Klux Klan after Reconstruction had been established, and then it ended, and we had entered that period that we all know as Jim Crow. The Ku Klux Klan reigned terror upon blacks, being allowed to do these things under the auspices of the Southern Democrats, who succeeded from the Union, formed the Confederacy, took up arms against the United States, which could be considered treason, lost that battle. And Reconstruction was established, then it ended, and here we are. So now we're transitioning through the Jim Crow era. Finally, we go through a period of the Great Depression, but it was in 1933 that FDR instituted the New Deal, which focused on relief that came by way of the Great Depression, and it focused on relief, focused on the unemployed, relief for the unemployed, recovery of the economy, and to reform America's financial system. That New Deal captured the attention of many Black Americans. And so I'm going to show you several things that took place. No, remove that. That's not what I want to see. I'll show you several things that took place here. Oh, come up. Yes. That took place. I'm not sure if you could read that very well, but not only was it FDR's New Deal, but the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and the Fair Housing Act of 1968. Those things, the New Deal, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and the Fair Housing Act of 1968 shifted the Black vote and the Northern Democrats towards a solidified Democratic coalition. The key word here is those things shifted the Black vote and the Northern Democrats towards a solidified Democratic Party coalition. Those are the key words there. However, when that took place, we advance to 1968. And in 1968, Richard Nixon ran on what was called the Southern Strategy. And the Southern Strategy was used to appeal to white Southern voters in opposition of civil rights. Once again, Richard Nixon ran on a platform that was called the Southern Strategy. And the Southern Strategy was used to appeal to white Southern voters that were in opposition of civil rights. When that happened, we had what's now known as the Great Switch. The Great Switch, ladies and gentlemen, is often referred to as party realignment or party flip, describing the process by which the American Democratic Party and the Republican Party, hear me, swapped their political ideologies, voting base, and core principles. The Great Switch was the process that took place by which the American Democratic Party and the Republican parties swapped their political ideologies, their voting bases, and their core principles. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party that was established at the founding of American society is not the Democratic Party and the Republican Party of today. Whenever you hear someone say things like the Democratic Party is the party of the KKK and the Republican Party is the party that freed the slaves, without expounding upon the Great Switch or the realignment of the two parties, that person is being disingenuous or exercising willful ignorance. Now, something I want to highlight here before I close out today. If you've recognized what's happened, we see a lot of American resistance to civil rights. This is a driver of me pushing Unlocking Black History. So let's ask ourselves, what are civil rights? Civil rights are the legal protections and freedoms granted by a nation's laws that ensures that all individuals, regardless of race, religion, gender, disability, or other personal traits, received equal treatment and access to opportunities in areas such as voting, education, employment, and public life. Regardless of when it was the founding of America, or if we're considering what's happening in today's climate in 2026, let me be clear. This thing isn't so much about the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. What we do see and cannot argue when it comes to the plight of Blacks in America and people of color, it's always been a matter of who is in power and who has the ability to provide access to resources and opportunities. Let's not lose sight of that. It is important to get involved so that we can strengthen our position. Because as I told you once before, my father once told me, and that was, anything about you not represented by you is not for you. Dr. Martin Luther King, whose anniversary just passed, the anniversary of his assassination just passed, let us know that progress is never permanent. Progress is something that has to consistently be pursued after, especially if you are Black and a person of color in the United States. Take care.